Okay, so this is a one-day lesson on chapter 9.1, which is about quadratic functions and their properties. Again, chapter 9 is going to be decently quick, so you need to make sure you stay on top of everything. I'll discuss some other things later in terms of our assessments and stuff, but like I said, overall you got to make sure you do your job this quarter because we have to get through 3 chapters, whereas I think last chapter we only had to get, I don't know, I think it just got 2, but I tried to give you a little bit of time to catch up on stuff. A quadratic function is a function in which the highest degree is 2. The general form of a quadratic function is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember, that has a degree of 2, that has a degree of 1, this has a degree of 0 because a, b, and c would be numbers. But again, a degree of 2, anything with an x squared is going to be a quadratic function if that is the highest power in it. Each of the letters has its own effect on the function's properties, and this portion of the year is based on your mastery of the craft. So taking and studying notes is going to assist you a lot in your success. Again, those of you who aren't usually taking notes, who just kind of watch and then go over to the video and try to answer questions that might get you through the homework, it is not going to get you through the test because, again, you have to know the stuff that's going on. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to try to get to just 2 letters. We're not going to talk so much about B today, but like I said, A and C is our focus of today's work. So what do we find when we look at A? Again, jot these couple, and like I said, when I say take notes, it doesn't mean copy every word, but just jot down the general idea of what's going on in a way that you understand. But A tells us a couple things. It tells us the direction of the graph. It tells us the width of the graph. If the first coefficient, which is A, again, the first coefficient is here, if that number is negative or positive, then you can relate that with it being happy. Happy means it looks like this because it is shaped like a U. And so it's happy, which means it looks like a smile, it opens up. If the first coefficient, this number here, again, first number is negative, then you can equate that with being sad. And again, sad would be looking something like this. Again, if you think about the graph itself, if I go to my graph here, go to my y equals and put y equals 6x squared, notice that 6 is positive, so when I graph it, it should look like a smile, or at least some sort of a smiling type shape. If I go back and I type in y equals negative 3x squared, that should be a sad number, which if you look at it, it opens down. Alright, so again, that first coefficient, that A, tells us the direction of the graph. That's the first thing it tells us. Alright, think of slope for a minute, and looking at the parent function y equals x squared has this general shape. So if you're going to just graph y equals x squared on paper, the vertex, which is the turning point, the vertex is the bottom or top point of your fraction. Again, that is the vertex. And so what we're talking about in the general parent function, the vertex is at 0, 0. But when it comes down to actually graphing it, in all honesty, all you have to do in a general y equals x squared graph is go over 1, up 1, and put a dot, go back 1, up 1, and put a dot, and then draw a U shape through those 2 dots. That, again, is your general shape. Again, notice that I use a slope of 1, or up 1 over 1, or up 1, back 1 to find the 2 dots, and that's because A equals 1. By A equals 1, what I mean by that is there's an invisible 1 there, which is why you go up 1 over 1, up 1, back 1 for that. But if you were to graph just a cheap sketch of y equals negative 2x squared, again, if your slope was negative 2, your vertex is still going to be at 0, 0, but the negative 2 means go down 2 over 1. And because it's a parabola, we go down 2 and back 1. And again, when we draw that, our U looks kind of like this. 2 things should be noticed from this. First off, the negative slope, this one right here, turned the parabola upside down because I had to go down and over, down and back in order to graph it. The second thing you should notice is, because my slope, even though I did it in a cheap way, because my slope has a step of 2 down, 1 over, it actually made it more narrow than it was originally. And that is the second observation that you should notice. If the letter A is larger than 1, again, write this down. If the letter A is larger than 1, then it's going to make it more narrow. On the other hand, if the letter A is smaller than 1, then it's going to make it more wide. Again, I will give you some visuals here just to kind of see what I'm talking about. If I was to start from here, and let's do a slope of 3, a slope of 1/3, and a slope of, I don't know, 2/3. Slope of 3 means I would, from this dot, go 1, 2, 3 up, 1 over. That would be my dot. Alright, so imagine a parabola that goes through that would be something like this. Alright, so of course it'd be reflected on both sides. 1/3 means I go up 1 over 3, which means that that parabola would have to go way over here in order to get its shape. 2/3 means up 2 over 3, which is about here, which means that that parabola is going to go about here. Again, this is 3, this is 1/3, this is 2/3. If you were to rank those numbers in terms of their decimals, 1/3 is 0.33, 2/3 is 0.673. So notice that the smallest number in this group is the widest. The biggest number in this group is the most narrow. Again, if you were to reflect that shape on both sides, that would be what your parabola looks like. It even works like that in your graphing calculator. So if I were to try to think, let's say I forget about this and I'm taking a test, if I were to graph y equals 3x squared and look at it, here it is. If I was to go back to the second one and put y equals 2/3 x squared, so parentheses 2 over 3 x squared, it's going to graph it right on the same picture, but notice that it goes out more wide than the original. And if I was to go back and do y equals 1/3, parentheses 1/3 x squared, you should notice that that is again even more on the outside of that. So you can use your graphing calculator, but you do want to try to learn to do that stuff kind of on your own. And again, that's why I'm telling you to take your notes and study them, because you want to know that stuff off the top of your head. You don't want to have to take 5 minutes to answer something that your observation can answer for you in 15 seconds. Let's just take a look at an example problem you're going to see on your homework. You're actually going to see 5 of these. You might again want to take good notes on this, as it's similar to some questions on your work. What you're going to be asked to do is to order the group of quadratic functions from widest to narrowest. When you do this, and again make this note, you can ignore the sign, because it doesn't matter whether it opens up or down. We just want to know which the widest and what's the most narrow. So again, if you're talking wide, that means you're talking a small number. Remember, narrow means we're talking about a fast number. This number here, and I would do that, is the number 1. Remember, if there's nothing there, it's 1. This, to me, just is a 6. 2/3 compared to 1/5, I may not be good with numbers, but what I can do is I can convert 2/3 into a decimal by dividing. That is 0.67. Again, don't care about the sign. And 1/5, 1 divided by 5, again I'm looking for the width of it, I don't care about the direction, is 0.2. So if you are going to put these in order from widest to narrowest, remember widest is the small number, and again that's without the sign. Widest is a small number, which means that the first graph would be y equals negative 1/5 x squared. My second graph should be whatever the next smallest number is, which is 0.67, so y equals 2/3 x squared. My third graph from 0.67 I think goes to 1, would be y equals x squared, and then my fourth would be y equals negative 6 x squared. And that again would be my situation of narrowest to wide, or widest to narrowest. And so you're going to be asked to do that, but what's going to happen is it's going to be multiple choice, and you have to select the one that is the best. But again, if you take your time and you remember to ignore the sign, again, if you take good notes and practice, I think it should be a question that you can get out of fairly easily, fairly quickly, because it's really not that bad to do. Alright, a lot of work in your chapter and outside of this year is going to be done with common sense. Multiple choice type problems. You are expected to understand what the quadratic function looks like in a general sense. You are not going to have to do a lot this year in terms of, deep stuff. You are typically just going to have to look at it, recognize that it opens up, that it's narrow, and some other things about it that help you to pick a answer, especially in this chapter. But like I said, because of that, you should be able to answer most of the graphing questions today. Again, not every day, but today especially, without any assistance from a graphing calculator. I believe the last thing I showed you how to use the graphing calculator to kind of pick the answers in your introduction, but again, that was just an introduction to show you that you could answer the questions. But at this point, if you were to be asked on those same questions, what's the graph look like, you should be able to recognize that the graph opens up, that the graph is more narrow, and make a good selection from that, especially in homework where at least you get three picks, but you want to try to work your way to where you get them right immediately. Second letter we're going to focus on today is C. The letter C is very simple yet very tricky, and I say tricky because you haven't overlooked it yet, but so many of my students overlook the simplicity of the letter C all the time in this chapter. If you think back to when we graphed this line, the first thing we did was this told me to go up 2 and put a dot, and then this told me up 3 over 1 and draw a line. If you remember this one, this told me to go down 6, 6, and then go up 1 over 2 and put a dot and draw a line. If you remember this one, that told me to go up 1 and then down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and over 1 and put a dot. Here's the thing. This is a constant. I understand that in this it was mx plus b, but there were only 2 letters, and so in each of these, yes, I understand that was b and that b was the y-intercept, but it's still a constant. It is the number that has nothing at all attached to it. It is our y-intercept. It is the value that if we were to take any variables away, y would equal 6, y would equal 1, y would equal 2. Well, let's look back. I think I should have something here. Let's see. I'll just take one from where we're going. If you consider this, if we were to take the x's away, that goes away, that goes away. Notice that the only number left is c. And so what c actually does for you is it is still your y-intercept. Alright? So in each of these graphs, the constant indicated our location on the y-axis. Again, this told me I crossed at 2. This told me I crossed at -6. This told me I crossed at 1. Nothing changes with quadratics. It's not b anymore because, again, we've got 3 letters in the general form, but the constant tells us, again, where the graph crosses the y-axis. So if you were to know or wonder where the graph crosses the y-axis, in other words, the y-intercept, ignoring these x's, putting 0 in here, it would cross at y equals 4. Ignoring these x's, it would cross at y equals 6. Here, ignoring your x, it would cross at y equals -3. And here, ignoring your x, it would cross at y equals 1. And just for proof, let's look at this just to make sure, again, that you see that, because you need to understand it. Again, the only way you master your craft is to kind of see what's going on. So 2x squared minus 3x plus 4 graph should cross about here. And it does. Again, that doesn't mean it's the vertex, but the graph actually goes through at 4. And what that does for you, if you learn how to use that to your advantage, is if you see a graph and you're supposed to select the possible answer, it helps if you know where it crosses the y-axis, because if you saw a graph that did this and crossed down here, you know it couldn't be it, because we know for a fact that it should be crossing at 4. Looking at the second one, and I won't do all of them, but just a couple of them. -0.4x squared minus 7x plus 6. Again, I don't know where the graph is going to be. I don't know how wide it's going to be, where it's going to be on the in the general location, but I do know that based off of this number, it's got to come back to 6, and it's got to cross at 6, so that should be somewhere up here. Again, I don't know what the graph looks like in general. I don't know if it was going, actually I think it is going down this way, but all I know is if you look at it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's going to cross somewhere around that area. So again, this is your y-intercept. We would know for a fact that it crosses at -3. So again, when you get your graph problems on today's work, and it says to select the best graph, or to graph it, and you have options in front of you, use C as part of your observation and your common sense there. So now let's just go ahead and look at some problems that you should be able to handle with your notes and with some understanding. Of course, notes first, understanding more after that. One of the things you're going to be asked to do, especially to start, is to answer the question based on the function below. And so this is going to have -2x squared plus 13x plus 7. One question is going to say, is it more wide or more narrow than its parent function? You have to remember that the parent function is x squared, which means that you're comparing it to the number 1. Alright? Yes, negative is there, but remember, when we're talking wide and narrow, we ignore the sign, and so we don't care about that. What we are looking at is that 2 is bigger than 1. Again, if you were to look at a slope of 2, it would go up 2 over 1. If you were to look at a slope of 1, it would go up 1 over 1, so your 2 would be more narrow than your parent function. Again, the general rule for width, as you are bigger than 1, any whole number, any number bigger than 1, is that the bigger the number, the more narrow it is. Again, imagine a slope of 10. You'd go way up 10 and then over 1. That means it's going to be extremely narrow compared to a slope of just 3 where you go up 3 over 1 and it goes over here. Alright, so again, more wide, more narrow. The good news is, again, you get a few of those. Just make sure you think your way through them and don't worry so much about finishing the assignment. Worry more about understanding why you answer what you answer. Another question says, what direction does it open? Again, that is your A. If you want a direction, because it's negative, it means it's sad, which means it opens down. Where is across the y-axis? Remember, this is your tricky number. Your y-intercept means you ignore your x's, so ignore that and ignore that. It would cross at 7. And then it asks, does it have a maximum or a minimum? Now, this is always a tricky question because people try to do this in their heads. The way you answer that question is, again, to consider what direction it opens, which is down. This is like a hill, and you might want to draw this picture. It is a hill, which means that you would be at the high point, which means that it is a maximum. Now, I don't know what word you have to type in, whether it's max or min or whatever, but just experiment with that. I'm sure it works. I know it works because I've used it plenty of times. But again, that is a hill with you on top of it. If it was, and this isn't the answer to this question, but if it was this, that would be a ditch. And because it's a ditch, you are standing at the lowest possible point, which would make it a minimum. So again, in terms of your experience, you need to understand that if your graph opens this way, it's going to be a maximum because that's where your vertex is. If it opens this way, it's going to be a minimum because your vertex is at a low point. Alright? Yes, another question on today's work is going to be factoring. Surprise. I'll talk about why in just a second, but let's go over this again, give you another shot to do it. Remember, we are looking for numbers that multiply to be 1 times negative 12, which is negative 12. And adds to be 4. Again, I am not going to go through the finding of the numbers. I think we've been doing that for almost 3 weeks to a month now. I will tell you that the numbers are 2 and 6. You need to practice the finding of the numbers, but like I said, I'll tell you that much, that it is 2 and 6. Because it's a positive 4, that means your big side has to be positive, and the only way I get a negative 12 is if the signs are different. You were then taught to ignore this sign and take this and put it over both of those numbers. The good news about this one was that because x is the only thing on top, these are already reduced, and so my answer is x minus 2 and x plus 6. Yes, this is on today's homework. Yes, it does affect your homework score, and yes, you can go ahead and keep skipping it like you probably have been, some of you, but your grade is going to be affected. You can't possibly increase your score unless you actually face what you've been running from, and so make sure that you take care of your opportunities that I'm giving you to get caught up. Alright? And yes, surprise, once again, we will even see the other two. Remember, here we are looking for numbers that multiply to be front times back, which is 24, and adds to be negative 14. Again, it's up to you to learn how to find the numbers, but I will tell you those numbers are 2 and 12. Because 14 is negative, it means that we need a negative big number. And the only way I get a positive 24 is if both of them are negative. Notice negative 2 plus negative 12 is positive 24. And once again, once we found the numbers, we were taught to ignore that and take this thing here and put it over both numbers. So 3x over negative 2, 3x over negative 12. Reducing that fraction, 3 over 2 does not reduce. Remember, I do not care about the sign because I know that the negative goes on the bottom. Notice again 3 over 2 is reduced, so that is fine. 3 over 12, again ignoring the sign because I don't care about it, turns into 1/4. Remember, I don't need the 1. It's just going to be x over negative 4, which means that my factors are 3x minus 2 and x minus 4. Please, again, make sure you take advantage of this time. I have a plan for you that I'm going to discuss in just a moment, and you need to make sure you are taking advantage of this plan because there is no going back on this. The third one is the one where there is no middle number. And what we have to do now is, with no middle number, we look and we say, well, this number is 5 times 5. That is x times x. That is 7 times 7. And so because of that, because everything is perfect, we put 5x plus 7, 5x minus 7. Those are the three types of factories that you need to understand what's going on. All right. Now, do not move on just yet, and make sure you let me finish everything else I have to say, because, again, you've got 2 days to work on this for the most part. So please work as hard as you can on this information. I am adding past information because you're still expected to know it. Since many of us have not mastered factoring, I have to put it in front of you. So we will see it on our assessments, which means our quizzes. Listen carefully. There will be a lot more quizzes, or there will be quizzes more than tests, because I'm probably just going to give each test once and use the second and third and fourth, whatever, for makeup. But I actually am only going to give each test twice. So again, you only get one makeup. That way, if you're going to fix it, you actually fix it. You don't waste my time with taking the same test 6 times. So you only get each test twice. Okay? So again, if you take the test once, you get 100. Great. If you take the test once, you get a 20. That's not good. If you take it again and get an 80, I'll just put both of them in there and average whatever's going on. But again, it won't replace it, because, we'll talk about all that later. But like I said, all I know is, for the most part, you're only taking each test twice. Only in a dire situation will we talk about moving past that. Again, if you are not putting in the time and effort, then your grade should be affected. You will also be asked to perform a mastery check. Remember that a mastery check is when I will call you up to my desk. I will put a problem on the whiteboard, which I now have a whiteboard for, and if you can answer that question with minimal assistance, that means you come up there and you say, I forgot what I'm supposed to do, and I might say something like, make the factor tree, and then from there you get your answer. That's fine. If you come up there and you ask me about how to start, and I tell you like a small nudge, and you start, and then you say, well, I forget how to do anything else, like I said, then you're going to get a 0 on that, and that is going to go on as a homework grade. Each time you come up, it is part of your homework grade, and it cannot be fixed. You can't show up for the mastery check, not know how to do the factoring, for example, and then come back and say, okay, now I know how to factor. Can I do it again? You have to be ready whenever the mastery check comes up. And so, again, you have to perform on that day. We will slowly revisit other topics, such as the exponent rules in Chapter 7, substitution elimination in Chapter 6. But for now, prepare for checkups on today's work. And what I mean by that is the stuff in today's homework, which I won't do yet. But again, in about 2 or 3 days, this becomes legal. And factoring, which starting next week becomes legal. The 3 types of problems that I discuss in the notes, which again is your x squared plus 5x, let's say minus 6. That'll be one I might put on there. 2x squared plus, 17x plus 8 might be one I put on there. Or 64x squared minus 9 might be one I put on there. If you know how to do all 3 of those, you can relax. If you do not know how to do all 3 of those, you better make sure you get some assistance quickly, because again, I am going to call you up. I am going to make you perform that in front of me, and if you don't, we are going to have a discussion about why you had not gotten help on it yet. Again, if you do not know what you are doing, it is your responsibility to get help. As much as we love blaming others, for example, we love to say that Mr. Bradley isn't doing, I don't know what I'm not doing, but I am sitting at my desk waiting for you to get your assistance. My job is only to present the information, which means to put it in front of you, which I do, as much as I can, even online, and give you the best opportunity to learn it. So I give you time in class for practice. I give you time in class for questions. I give you time before school, except for at the end of the quarter, to come in and get help. I offer you or let you know that there is time after school. And in all honesty, if you ask anyone, that is a very good opportunity for you to learn. It is not my job to force you to learn it in any way, which is why, again, some of you think that I'm being mean. I can't force you to learn it. All I'm going to do is keep giving assessments, and if you fail them, that's on you. So please work hard this quarter so we can work on passing the semester. Again, if you follow me, I do have a plan to assist those of you who fell behind the 3rd quarter, but you have to be with me. That means do not fall behind me. That means for right now, you better start working to stay with me, because I am probably going to give some makeup tests from the 3rd quarter. But if you are not ready on the day that I give that makeup, for example, let's say that you did badly on substitution elimination, there's going to be a point where I work on substitution elimination this quarter. at some point after working on substitution elimination, I'm going to give another test from the substitution elimination section. On that day, if you perform, it will replace your substitution elimination grade from the third quarter. On that day, if you are not prepared, then it is just not going to do anything at all, and you do not come up. So again, think about the zeros and the F's that you got in the third quarter. When I get to something that you have not understood yet, you need to make sure you work on it, because that means at some point I'm going to give that makeup test and it will replace your grade. I will not give you anything before or after school to make it up, but you will have to make sure that you are on point as well as with the information to do that. Yes, some of you have to work very hard to catch up, but in my opinion, if you took a whole quarter off and allowed yourself to fall behind, I think you deserve to have to work very hard, because you did that to yourself. It is your choice. Again, you don't have to work hard on the extra information that I give, but I will do my best to offer the chances, which, as I said, underlining this, best opportunity. So go ahead and go to MathXL and get started. Good luck. I will see you all Monday.